Welcome into Teal the Show. We've got Frank Frangie here. The Jaguars have officially wrapped up preseason. They got a big win on Friday night, wrap up preseason 3-0. Frank, I don't know if that makes this a victory Monday, but I guess we could also just count it however we want to count it.
Always count a victory Monday.
There you go.
Never pass a victory Monday. Hey, it was a good preseason. It really was. It was a good camp. It was a hard camp. It was a good preseason for them. Wins and losses are fine in the preseason, but playing well is really important, and I thought they played well throughout the preseason. I really did.
Yeah, look, they definitely did some good things. So they made it out of preseason 3-0. This is back-to-back seasons for Doug Peterson's group that they've gone undefeated in the preseason. Doug was asked about it after the game. He said, that doesn't matter. I actually asked Travis Etienne about it as they wrapped up training camp. I said, hey, do preseason wins carry over momentum into the regular season? He goes, no, because if it was the other way, we wouldn't care about it. So clearly this team understands that these preseason wins don't help you when week one rolls around.
But I'll tell you what does help you, and that's playing well and being convicted and understanding the urgency of the season. And I think that's where they are. It's more than just winning the preseason games. It's how well did your backups play. It's how well did you do in the joint practices with the Bucs. It's what was the sense of urgency. And I think that's how you evaluate. I promise you that's how they're evaluating their players. And it was a good preseason. Winning or not, it truly was a good preseason.
Yeah, look, it overall was a good preseason for this team. Let's talk a little bit about some of those players that maybe stood out during the Atlanta Falcons game. This is the first time we get Frank Frangie with a chance to chime in on this thing since it was a Friday night game. Frank, the starters played the majority of the first half. Yep. Now, they weren't going against the Falcons starters, so right. They did what you expected them to do, which was go out there and kind of dominate the action. But what did you think about maybe Trevor Lawrence's performance in that first half?
I thought Trevor played terrific. I thought he played terrific in the two series he was in this game. I thought he played terrific the handful of plays he was in the first game. Look, all you can do is you can only play against the team that's out there. You can't determine or decide who the Falcons are going to play. So, yeah, you were going to win when they were playing backups and you were playing starters. The Falcons didn't play like 40 players in that game. But I thought Trevor played very well. He seemed in command. He got the ball out of his hand. He didn't hold it too long. I thought he was accurate. I thought there was a rhythm with his receivers. There's already a rhythm with Brian Thomas Jr., and he just got here. That's a guy to really watch this year. Didn't have Christian Kirk, but had about everybody else. No, I thought they looked very good. The starters and the first backups I thought looked really good for the Jags.
On the other side of the ball, the Jaguars defense, they also played a pretty complete game there. Got a chance to see Tyson Campbell get a little bit of action, maybe a couple of pass breakups, things that you wanted to see from a guy who just signed the big contract, and definitely a guy that's going to be important for the Jaguars defense this year.
Oh, I think the Jaguars defense looked like you're supposed to look when you're playing the backups, and they were playing backups, and I understand that. But, yeah, Tyson Campbell looked really good. By all accounts, and we don't know till they play, they're not showing their hand, nor should they. But by all accounts, Ryan Nielsen's a guy that wants to play press coverage and a lot of man coverage. That's the book on him. We'll see if it plays out that way. But I think it's going to. And if it does, guys like Tyson Campbell really have to play. He's going to get the best receiver every week, you would think. It's going to start with Miami, who's got really fast receivers. So, yeah, he's got to play well. I thought he did. I thought he's been good all camp and coverage, and he's got to play well. It's interesting to see how the rest of the secondary will do. Ronald Darby, how will he do as a veteran guy? Darnell Savage finally got to play in a game. He's been down for a while, nursing a small injury. It was good to see him out there. That secondary is going to be really important for the Jags.
All right, so with preseason wrapped up, week one is right around the corner. We'll start talking about the Dolphins maybe a little bit farther down the line. But let's kind of put a bow on this thing. Right. Yeah, let's talk some MVPs. Frank's MVPs, let's say offensive MVPs so far through the preseason for the Jaguars would be...
Yeah, well, for me, I'm going to put backups in there because they played more.
Anybody?
Probably Parker Washington. I think Parker Washington and Tank Bigsby played really well. And again, they're not starters, but they've played more in the preseason than anybody else. Parker Washington had that great offseason. It showed up in the preseason. Tank Bigsby did as well. Parker Washington, the preseason MVP, if I got to pick one, a hair ahead of Tank Bigsby. And again, in fairness to the starters, you can't pick them because they didn't play very much. But the guys we did see a lot of, Parker Washington really impressed me.
I am 100% on board with you with Parker Washington. The coaching staff's raved about him. His teammates have raved about him. And somehow he managed to not only live up to those expectations, but exceed them so far this preseason. We'll see what's in store for him during the regular season. Okay, defensive side I feel like is a little bit more difficult. Who you got on the defensive side of the ball?
Trayvon. Trayvon, the little bit he's played has been hard to block. They haven't been able to block him in practice. They haven't been able to block him in joint practices. And they certainly, the Falcons couldn't block him. I know it was their backups. I think 44 is going to have a big year. I just get this sense that it's happening for him. He's in a defense that fits him now. Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker both get to put their hand on the ground and go get the quarterback. And I think Trayvon Walker all through this camp has really flashed for me. He's had a terrific camp.
That spells good things for the Jaguars and bad things for opposing quarterbacks. Said it last year before the season, and I can say it again and feel pretty confident. If 44 and 41 both have good seasons, the Jaguars are probably in pretty good shape.
I really think they're going to. I listen, the old defense where they rushed and they dropped, they stood up, they put their hand on the ground, that's fine. I know that's today's football. Let those two guys put their hand on the ground and get after the quarterback. That's what they do. Barring injury, I can't imagine those two guys not having big years. Remember now, they had 28 sacks between them last year. Yeah. That's a lot of sacks. I think they're going to. I really believe they're going to have big years this year as well.
All right, we'll see what's in store for 44 and 41. Some of their teammates are trying to make sure that they have a roster spot. Those guys aren't in jeopardy. We'll talk about some of the guys who are maybe on the roster bubble and some of the tough decisions the Jaguars have to make before tomorrow. That's coming up next when Teal the Show comes back. All right, welcome back here into Teal the Show. Some big breaking news kind of coming out this morning. The Jaguars moved on from edge Trevis Gipson. He was a guy that I think a lot of us penciled in as maybe the Jaguars' third edge on this team as they kind of look for that third pass rusher. Frank, a late-round draft pick as they send him to the West Coast. Not maybe what we expected from this guy, but maybe a good return for the Jaguars.
I think he got outplayed. Yeah. I think Miles Cole is the guy to really watch. The late-round draft pick out of Texas Tech, he's longer. He's 6'6", 270. Trevis is about 6'4". DJ Coleman 6'5", 260. They're going to be, those ends are long now. Trayvon and Josh Hines Allen are 6'5". Eric Armstead's going to play out there some. He's 6'7". That's what you want, those long, athletic guys. And I think Miles Cole is the reason Trevis Gipson has moved on. I really think Miles Cole is a guy they like. He's going to get better and better. When he got here, I thought he was a bit of a project, would be good in time. But they like 59 now, so keep an eye on him as one of the backup pass rushers.
Now, I don't want to dive too far into the nitty-gritty of the 53, Frank, but overall, it's a good problem to have when you're winning games in the preseason because that means that you have a pretty good roster from top to bottom. So that means there's going to be some tough decisions to make on this roster. I mean, some of the rookies are going to have tough spots. You mentioned a guy like Miles Cole who had to beat out a veteran player to possibly make it onto this roster. That's tough.
No question. I think there's three positions where they're going to cut guys who are going to wind up on other NFL teams, on other NFL's 53. I think offensive line, whoever they cut on the offensive line, if they keep 9, they're going to cut 2 good players. And I think 2 players who will wind up on somebody else's 53. I really believe that. Wide receiver, I think they're going to cut a guy, at least 1 or 2 that are going to wind up on somebody else's 53. And there's a lot of cornerbacks, man. There's a lot. After the starting 3, I'm counting Savage as a nickel, the starting 3, which is Campbell and Darby and Savage, boy, there's Monteric Brown and there's Christian Braswell and there's a bunch of, there's Trey Prince who they really like. There's Jarian Jones. That's a lot of guys. So they have a lot of athleticism. So cornerback, wide receiver, and offensive line are the 3 spots. I think they're cutting good players. And that's a good, you said it, that's a good problem to have, to cut good players. I think they are.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is a good problem to have for sure. It means you've got talent, and you can't get everybody back on the practice squad, even if they might like to. But it is shaping up like maybe the Jaguars will have a handful of talent. A guy you mentioned a second ago, DJ Coleman, spent last year on the Jaguars practice squad, and he was a guy that a lot of us singled out during training camp and during the offseason program. I remember talking to Bill Shuey about DJ. He said he was a guy who had taken big steps forward. He said that during the offseason. Next thing you know, he's a guy competing for a roster spot. 1 year on that practice squad can change where a guy is.
And there's a lot of that out there, long, athletic. We said this, I think the first Teal the Show we did, the one for this season, we talked about how this team looks different. They look longer and they look more athletic. I was talking to Trent Baalke about this last week, about how it just looks the part. And he said, well, Frank, it takes time. You got to get to where that's how it looks. Well, that's how it looks. Again, you still got to go do it. We all know that. But I think this team looks as long and athletic, and I think it showed up in the preseason as they have in a long time.
All right, they have to wrap up the roster and get it down to 53 players by tomorrow, so some tough decisions on the horizon. We're going to see how that all shakes out, and we'll update you on that here on Channel 4 once the roster is finalized. Before then, before we wrap up Teal the Show, because we're almost out of time here, Frank, we got to look ahead to this Dolphins game, at least for a second, right? All right, Miami Dolphins, when you look at the Dolphins on paper, got to be one of the fastest offenses in the NFL. We know it's going to be a challenge from the Jaguars defense. Week 1, we've talked about Ryan Nielsen. We've talked about he's the big change on this defense. You talk about a test in his first game on the sideline with the Jaguars. That's a test.
There's no question. The story of that game, the story of the Dolphins season will be Tua throwing to those fast receivers, Tyreek Hill, Waddle, that they can really run. That's the story of their season. And so Can the Jags affect Tua in the pocket? That's a big, big part of this. Can that new defensive front, that 4-3 that the Jags are playing, can it affect Tua in the pocket and make him get the ball out quick? Now, Tua can be very good with time. He's not as good when pressured. So that's a storyline. We've got 2 weeks to talk about that, but I think that storyline will be in play.
We got plenty of time to kind of build up to that one, but boy, oh boy, is that a test and one that it would be nice to see the Jaguars pass in week 1, but we'll kind of build our way up to that just like the team continues to build their way up through that. But we've wrapped up the preseason, Frank. We made it, so is the team. Next thing you know, the games will start counting. They wrapped it up with an undefeated preseason. Maybe they can start the season in the same kind of fashion. Frank, thanks for being here. Thank you at home for tuning in. Good night, everybody, and go Jags.